Now today is going to be rather unique. We're going to finish up a series by taking a close look at chapters 9 and 10 of Esther, but I'm going to ask all of you also to participate in a small portion of the celebration of Purim. We are going to join those folks of the Old Testament and the Jewish nation as they have celebrated Purim for thousands of years. I'm excited about today's message. But before we get into the last chapters of Esther, I want to share with you something that happened in 1953. Stalin, who was the king or the ruler over Russia, issued a decree, or was about to issue a decree, for the destruction of the Jewish people in Russia, for the murder and the deportation of Jews throughout Russia. But right after the celebration of Purim, within hours, he mysteriously died. And the decree to annihilate or deport all the Jews was not ushered in. Now, you might say coincidence, but as a Christian, I'm going to tell you it was the providence or the handiwork of God. No different than World War II with Germany and Hitler, who wanted to annihilate the Jewish people in Europe and surrounding areas. That failed because of the hand of God. After the war, there was what was called the Nuremberg trials. Has anybody ever heard of the Nuremberg trials? Yeah. What was that? For those who did such terrible things to the Jewish nation and to others, justice was ushered out or in through the Nuremberg trials, and many Nazis were hung. Yeah. And throughout Europe, many of the Nazis who stood by their belief in annihilation of the Jews were also brought to justice and hung, okay? We would say, well, that's justice, okay? You have to have justice if you want peace. Well, today, 2,500 years ago, we're going to take a look at how the Jewish nation and the Persians administered justice for those who were murderers, those who wanted to see the annihilation of the Jews. All right, let's get going. We're going to go through this rather quick. That is chapter 9. Come along with me as I read this historical account. Now in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. For us, it would be March, 1st of February. On the 13th day of the same, when the king commanded the edict were about to be carried out, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, the reverse occurred. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. 2, the Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought to harm their harm. And no one could stand against them, for the fear of them had fallen on all people, all the officials of the provinces, and the satraps and the governors and the royal agents also helped the Jews, for the fear of Mordecai had fallen on them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces, for the man Mordecai grew more and more powerful. The Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and did as they pleased to those who hated them. In Susa, the citadel itself, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. Now I want you to know they ushered justice. How do we know that? Listen up. And also killed Parshandatha and Dalphon and Aspatha and Poratha and Adela and Erdatha, and Parmastha, and Erasai, and Eradiah, and Viazatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the sons of Hamadatha, the enemy of the Jews, but they laid no hands on the plunder. See, the difference is Stalin wanted to get his hands on the wealth of the Jews. Hitler did get his hands on a lot of the wealth of Jews, and it fueled World War II. But justice does not plunder. Underline this if you have your own Bible. But they laid no hands on the plunder. 11. That very day, the number of those killed in Susa, the citadel, was reported to the king. I mean, everything went through the king. And the king said to Queen Esther, in Susa, the citadel, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men, and also the 10 sons of Haman. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is your wish? It shall be granted you. And what further is your request? It shall be fulfilled. And Esther said, if it pleases the king, let the Jews who are in Susa be allowed tomorrow also to do according to this day's edict. One more day of justice. And let the 10 sons of Haman be hanged on the gallows. So the king commanded this to be done. A decree was issued in Susa, and the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. The Jews who were in Susa gathered also on the 14th day of the month of Adar and killed 30 men in Susa. Further justice for those who stood their ground, and would not recant, and they vowed to destroy the Jews, but they laid no hands on the plunder. Now you have 800 people brought to justice, but no one laid hands on the plunder. 16. Now the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also gathered and defended their lives. Now this is out beyond, and got relief from their enemies and killed 75,000 of those who hated them, but they laid no hands on the plunder. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested and made the day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were in Susa gathered on the 13th day and the 14th day and rested on the 15th day, making that a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore, the Jews of the villages who lived in the rural towns hold the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day for gladness and feasting, as a holiday, and as a day in which they send gifts and food to one another. Wow, I went through that fast. I want you to see that justice was ushered among all the provinces. Now, the provinces had about 50 million people. And you might say, well, wow, 75,000 people perished or justice was ushered. Yes, that's just a small portion of a fraction of 1%. So it was a very few. Now, the Jews could have taken vengeance or started a war on all the people, but they did not. They just ushered in justice for those. No different than after World War II, when the Nazis were, you might say, hunted down throughout Europe, and justice was ushered in. Because without justice, you can't have peace. All right. Now what we're going to do is step into a very ancient celebration called Purim. To this day, Jewish people celebrate a 3-day event. It goes like this. On the 13th day, they fast. They get ready. They make costumes for their children. villains and costumes for heroes, just like we do in Halloween. On the 14th day, they gather in rural communities together, and the children show off their costumes and participate in a service that remembers the whole story of Esther. So when the story is read, it's called the Megillah. It is the people who participate. It is the people who teach the children to remember the providence of God. And they do it in this way. Leslie, please hand these out to as many people as you can. Here, I want you to hand those out to people. Walk around and hand them out. Okay. Children dress up and wear masks. Villains, some of heroes. And the people participate in the Megillah service by whenever the name of Haman, the villain, is mentioned, everybody boos. Okay, this is part of the celebration. So I'm going to see how well you're listening to me this morning. Whenever Haman is mentioned, good. I like that. And then the hero of the story is Mordecai. And now you have a noisemaker. Okay. Do you remember as a child that little thing you used to spin? Okay, try to find that today. I looked all over for those, but it's part of the Purim celebration. The Jews use that whenever Mordecai is mentioned, the hero. Let's try. You've got a noisemaker. You have hands. You have voices. Ready? Mordecai. Good job. Now imagine teaching your children this. How excited they would be. I went to church and wow, we made noise and we celebrated. And those of you who may be old timers in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, you're not sinning, okay? I'm just telling you, we're going to enter into a celebration. This was with great joy. All right. Ready? Haman. Ooh, Mordecai. All right. Now we're going to finish the story. I'm going to start 9:14 and jump to 20. You ready? So the king commanded this to be done. A decree was issued in Susa, and the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. And Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, obligating them to keep the 14th day of the month of Adar and also the 15th day of the same year by year, as the days on which the Jews got relief from their enemies, and on the month that had been turned for them from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days for sending gifts of food to one another and gifts to the poor. This is the tradition. If you're a Jewish person, during this celebration of Purim, you must give 2 gifts to 2 poor people. You got to give gifts to the poor. Imagine if we did that. You'd find something in your garage that you're not using and you give it to somebody who needs it. Or something maybe of wealth or food to give as our God gives. 23. So the Jews accepted what they had started to do and what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them and had cast pur, that is, cast lots, to crush and destroy them. But when it came before the king, he gave the order in writing that the evil plan that he had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore, they called these days Purim, after the term poor. Therefore, because of all that was written in this letter, and all what they had faced in this matter, and all what had happened to them, the Jews firmly obligated themselves and their offspring, and all who joined them, what without fail they would keep these 2 days according to what was written. And at that time they appointed every year that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, in every clan, province, and city, and that these days of Purim should never fall into disuse among the Jews, nor should the commemoration of these days cease among the descendants. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai, the Jew, gave full written authority, confirming the second letter about Purim. Letters were sent to all the Jews to 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus in words of peace and truth, because justice was ushered in. These days of Purim should be observed at their appointed seasons, as Mordecai, the Jew, and Queen Esther obligated them, and as they obligated themselves and their offspring with regard to their fasts and their lamenting. The command of Queen Esther confirmed these practices of Purim, and it was recorded in writing. That's what history is, recorded in writing. Prehistory is with no writing. Okay, so this is historical. One chapter to go. It's short, folks. King Ahasuerus imposed tax on the land. Now that you might want to boo, okay? Those of you who but no, now we pay taxes proudly, okay? And on the coastlands of the sea, and all the acts of his power and might, and the full account of the high honor of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai, the Jew, was second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was great among the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all the people. And he spoke peace to all the people. Wow. We're finished with the Chronicles of Esther. What are you going to take home? My prayer is this: as you remember the book of Esther, as today you celebrate Purim with joy, great joy and celebration, like maybe you never have before, you will remember the providence of God, the handiwork of God in history, in the present day, and in your future. I don't know what you're going through right now. Difficulties, maybe celebrations. Give glory to God and know that no matter what's happening in your life, God is working for the good of all those who love him and who live according to his purpose. Remember that the Jews did not plunder the Persians, although they could have. They were permitted to, you might think, because the decree was to stand up against those who wanted to hurt them and to plunder. The king gave that permission. Let me tell you what is proclaimed in the New Testament in 1 Corinthians. Everything is permissible for me, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is permissible for me, but not everything builds up. Do you realize it's legal in many areas of our country to smoke pot? But is it beneficial? It's permissible for you to get drunk at home. But is that going to build you up? There's a lot of things that are permissible for us. You can watch pornography. It's legal. But is that going to benefit you and build you up? Well, you know the answer. Yes, they could have plundered, but that would have gone against the first commandment, where you trust God to care for you and take care of you. Yes, you can usher in justice, but you don't steal, you don't plunder. You trust God to take care of things. I hope you'll take this home with you. Christians are to celebrate, because our forefathers celebrated all that God has done. Esther and the celebration of Purim should remind us to participate and to celebrate festivals. You know that every Old Testament festival had elements where people participated. The Feast of Booths, you live in a booth to remind of all those times in the wilderness. Passover, you celebrate a big meal. Purim, you participate and remember. Do you realize that every Sunday worship service or Christian worship service is a little Easter celebration? When we remember how God delivered us from the wages of sin, death, and the power of the devil. Every festival in the Old Testament points to the coming of Jesus Christ. God sent Esther before the king for such a time to spare the children of Israel. It is God, 2024 years ago, who sent his one and only Son, born of a virgin, to be our Redeemer for such a time to save us from sin, death, and the power of the devil. And we celebrate that today. And it is Jesus who ushered in a sacrament where we get to participate, a celebration to remember. You know, the first Purim was a very solemn time. Lives were on the line. But from that point on, they celebrated with gladness. The first Passover was a very solemn night. The angel of death passed over, but from that point on, they celebrated that feast with joy and gladness. The night that Jesus ushered in the Lord's Supper, it was a very solemn night. The night he was betrayed. But from that point on, we celebrate with gladness and joy. And we participate in what is called the Lord's Supper and what it means to us.